Congressman, thanks for coming in. How is Buffalo treating you so far?
I'm enjoying it. I finally had buffalo wings from Buffalo. But back in December, I announced that I was going to embark on a tour throughout the state of New York, and I thought it was only fitting to begin the tour here in Buffalo.
You had wings at Gabriel's Gate,
I
which
did.
is one of my favorites. But everybody in Buffalo has their favorite wing spot. Who did you go to a true Buffalonian and say, "Tell me where to go"? How did you decide?
I sought advice from a resident of Buffalo.
Okay,
Gabriel's Gate was on top of the list.
and they were good.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
yes, it lived up to its expectations.
good answer. Um, are you running for governor?
Considering a run for governor, so I'm in the exploratory phase. I'll make a final decision in mid 2025. But for me, I was deeply affected by the outcome of the 2024 election. There was no state that saw a greater swing toward Donald Trump than New York. And that to me was not a coincidence, a consequence of failing governance at the state and local level. Most New Yorkers feel like we're heading in the wrong direction. Most New Yorkers feel we're paying more and more for less and less. Our public safety, our quality of life, our affordability are declining. Our taxes and costs are rising. And a wise person once said, if you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. So I truly believe we're at a crossroads. Do we double down on a broken system? Or do we choose a new generation of leadership that can fix what is broken in our politics?
What would cause you to not run for governor?
Look, every candidate has to assess his or her viability. So obviously, I'm going to, do polling. I want to travel throughout the state. I want to listen to New Yorkers and learn about their concerns. And, the decision will be part empirical and part intuitive. It has to feel like the right decision. But, I would love to serve the state of New York in a much greater capacity.
You are in Kathy Hochul territory here.
Yeah.
You came right to the belly of the beast, right, with this visit to Buffalo. Why should Western New Yorkers, who right now have a governor from their hometown, consider voting for someone from the Bronx who's making his first trip here?
It's a fair question. For me, what matters is not where you're from, but whether you're delivering. And so I would ask the people of Buffalo to pose a simple question. Do you believe that the broken political system in Albany is delivering for you? When Governor Hochul's Public Service Commission is imposing an 18.6% gas rate hike on the middle class and working class residents of Buffalo, that to me is an example of the system not delivering for Buffalo. It's failing Buffalo. And so I would argue that we need a new generation of leadership.
Is the Public Service Commission supposed to be independent? Do you think it's appropriate for a governor to interject?
In theory, it's independent, but in practice, it's a gubernatorial agency. And it is fair to ask whether middle class and working class New Yorkers can absorb the impact of a double-digit increase at a time when all New Yorkers are struggling to recover from the highest inflation in more than 4 decades. Like, we have to consider, we lost the election in 2024 because of inflation, because of the crushing cost of living. And for me, we in the Democratic Party should have a simple mission: lower cost, lower crime rates, create opportunity for New Yorkers, and make government work for working people.
You've been very critical of Kathy Hochul. I think she would say that she's proposed things to address exactly what you just mentioned, especially affordability and dealing with crime across New York State.
Yeah.
What do you make of her proposals in the state of the state and what she's trying to push through the legislature now?
Well, for me, what matters is not what you propose. What matters is what you deliver. And, so take as an example public safety. New York has the most dysfunctional criminal justice system in the nation. Like, New York has a policy of releasing repeat violent offenders, which has led to a cycle of repeat violent offending. I mean, we've seen a dramatic rise in the number of repeat offenders for felony assaults, for grand larceny auto, robbery, shoplifting. And what I find troubling is New York is the only state in the country that prohibits judges from considering the public safety risk of repeat offenders and violent offenders. And the question of whether judges should have the authority to consider public safety risk, if I were to present that question to the people of New York in the form of a referendum, the majority of New Yorkers would support it because it's a matter of common sense. But the trouble with Albany is that common sense has become dangerously uncommon here in New York.
You sound like a Republican on that issue.
I think it's, Fiorello LaGuardia once said that there's no Democratic or Republican way to take out the trash. No one thinks of sanitation as a Democratic or Republican or a left-wing or right-wing issue. You simply think of it as a core function of government. The same is true of public safety. Like every New Yorker, Democrats and Republicans, blacks and whites, Asians and Latinos want an affordable cost of living and safe streets. And that's what government should be delivering. It should be focusing on the basics and ignoring the distraction.
A lot of what you're mentioning there is bail reform, right? That
Yes.
dates back to 2019.
Yes.
What specific changes, if you are governor 2 years from now, will you be pushing through the legislature dealing with bail reform?
So I would reform bail reform, and I would empower judges to consider the public safety risk of repeat offenders and violent offenders. And I take seriously the concern that bail, punishes poverty. So I could imagine a system where you either have remand or release, right? If you are a non-repeat and a non-serious offender, you should be released. But if you're either a repeat offender or a serious offender, then you should be remanded. Like we should no longer be releasing people onto the streets who then go on to commit violence against innocent New Yorkers.
The Brennan Center, which is based in New York City, says there is no causation between that they can find scientifically between bail reform and increased crime rates. Do you
I would
question that?
So I would encourage the academics who are living in an ivory tower to speak to the practitioners on the field, on the ground, speak to the law enforcement professionals. Right here in Erie County, the sheriff, John Garcia, has said that bail reform has led to double-digit increases in car theft. In my neck of the woods in New York City, we have seen a nearly 150% rise in the number of repeat offenders for felony assaults, more than 100% for grand larceny auto, more than 80% for robberies, more than 60% for shoplifting and burglary. Like, how much more evidence do we need? I had in my own district, I had a 14-year-old who was stabbed to death by a repeat offender who was released back onto the streets. Like, we should no longer live in a state where mothers have to bury their children because the New York criminal justice system insists on releasing repeat violent offenders. And again, this is an 80-20 issue. If this were on the ballot, 80% of New Yorkers, blacks and whites, Latino and Asians, Democrats and Republicans would vote for it because it is a matter of common sense.
Let's talk about Donald Trump. You mentioned the 2024 election. Most members of Congress in your party right now are out there protesting. They're rallying outside the Department of Education or the Treasury. What should Democrats be doing beyond that right now if they're upset with the direction Donald Trump is taking the country in?
We have to pick our fights. We cannot react hysterically and hyperbolically to everything that Donald Trump says or does. And for me, the most dangerous decision that he has made is the spending freeze. I mean, Donald Trump is claiming to have the authority to defund whatever program he wishes, whenever he wishes, for whatever reason he wishes, even if it means violating an act of Congress. New York State receives about $100 billion in funding from the federal government. And the majority of those funds are for Medicaid. And the Medicaid program is facing an unprecedented assault from Trump and House Republicans. House Republicans put forward a budget that would cut Medicaid by $880 billion, which would destabilize the largest sector of Buffalo's economy. Right? Catholic Health, Kaleida Health, all are heavily dependent on Medicaid funding. And these are employers who employ thousands of people here in Buffalo. So I feel like the highest responsibility of the New York delegation is to protect the federal funding that fuels job creation and economic growth here in places like Buffalo.
And considering Democrats are in the minority in the House, in the Senate, and then Donald Trump is in the White House, seems like you're relying a lot on the courts right now. How much confidence do you have that the judiciary holds up against what you would, I assume, consider to be sort of lawlessness?
Look, I believe in the American system because we've survived much greater challenges than Donald Trump. For me, there's nothing more resilient than the American experiment in democracy. And every time we've gone to court, we've won. When Donald Trump issued an executive order ending birthright citizenship, We took him to court and won in the first round. When he issued an executive order freezing federal funds for every program, we took him to court and won in the first round. When he granted Elon Musk and his team access to the most sensitive payment system of the central government, we took him to court and won. So I believe in our system. And congressional Democrats, even though we're in the minority, we have more leverage than people think. Republicans cannot fund the government without House Democrats. Republicans cannot raise the debt ceiling without House Democrats. And it's unclear whether Republicans can even pass a tax bill without House Democrats. And so even though on the surface it appears that Republicans have control over every branch of government, I feel like the reality is much closer to divided government.
There are some people in your party, some activists, who say Democrats should be in the Senate, should be voting against every nominee, right? Who think those of you in the House should be voting against everything, just blanket. We're going to hit a debt ceiling soon. The U.S. government could go into default if the debt ceiling isn't raised. Do you worry Democrats would bear some blame if they don't help increase the debt ceiling as we approach that?
We're definitely going to raise the debt ceiling because defaulting on the nation's debt would mean economic catastrophe.
What if they tied that, though, to very unpopular proposals in your view?
Look, I wish we lived in a world where there was no brinksmanship around the debt limit, but it's a political reality in Washington, D.C. But it might compel both sides to come together and broker a bipartisan compromise that moves the country forward. And we need more bipartisanship in D.C. because it's hyperpartisan.
It's funny. I'll travel to other parts of the country and tell people I live in Buffalo, and they say, "Oh, New York City." And I say, it's a good bit away, right? It's an hour flight. It's a 6-hour drive. But what's happening in New York City right now is sort of at the fore politically for the whole country with the mayor and the crisis that's going on there right now. I read the full, 8-page letter from the former U.S. attorney in Manhattan. Kathy Hochul was asked last night if she would consider firing the mayor of New York City, which the governor has the ability to do. Yeah. She said she's looking at it. If you were governor, would you fire Eric Adams?
I would remove the mayor. The governor said she's carefully reviewing it. I'm not clear what she's reviewing. We have the former acting U.S. attorney publicly stating that she saw firsthand a quid pro quo between the mayor of New York and the Trump administration. That, to me, is grounds for removal. It's unacceptable. The mayor, and what I found interesting about the memo is that it dropped the charges, but it left open the possibility of renewing the prosecution after the mayoral election. And so the fear of a renewed federal prosecution keeps Mayor Adams perpetually under the thumb of the Trump administration. It's as if New York City has become nothing more than an agent of the Trump administration. I feel like it's a dangerous precedent, and the governor must intervene.
We've talked about the cost of living, crime. What are the other big issues that you think face New York State right now?
We have to figure out how to make government work. People feel like government is fundamentally failing them. In 2015, the state budget was about $142 billion. 2025, Governor Hochul is proposing a $252 billion budget, a 77% increase, more than $110 billion in increase. I have not met a single New Yorker who has seen a $110 billion improvement in the delivery of government services. And something is fundamentally failing, and we have to focus like a laser on figuring out how to make government work. I also feel like we have to invest more heavily in infrastructure and transportation. When I travel on Amtrak Acela from New York City to DC, it has a maximum speed of about 150 miles per hour, an average speed of about 82 miles per hour. By contrast, the Empire service from New York City to Albany to Buffalo to Niagara, it has an average speed of 55 miles per hour. That's unacceptable. We should be focused like a laser on improving the speed and reliability of train service between New York City and Buffalo and Niagara. The region desperately needs it and deserves it.
Finally, what is the one issue that you think will resonate most with voters in Buffalo that you will campaign on in Western New York against Kathy Hochul?
I feel like lower costs and lower crime rates is a unifying, universal message that unites all New Yorkers. That, to me, it transcends identity, it transcends geography. We all want an affordable place to live and safe streets.
If you decide to run, you said mid this year, right?
Mid 2025.
You'll be
Final
making a decision.
Yes.
You'll come back to Buffalo and talk to us at that point.
Well, I'm definitely coming back to Buffalo no matter what. Those wings were addictive, so
There we go.
I'll be back.
Congressman.